Recorded live at the center of the earth. This is Robots from Tomorrow. Systems and Aid. Please welcome your host, Greg.
Hello and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg, glad to have you with us. Now, this is usually the part of the show where I launch into my spiel about multiversitycomics.com. How going there is not only the best way to follow this show, but it's also the best way to stay informed about this wild and crazy world of comics. How they have news, reviews, interviews, long-form think pieces, process breakdowns, and even other podcasts like the DC3 Cast, Multiversity Manga Club, Make My Multiversity, and Force Goes Coast to Coast. Unfortunately, as you've probably heard by now, multiversitycomics.com closed down at the end of last month. The site will remain online as an archive in some form or another, but the days of it being actively updated have come to an end. I'm planning on looping back around to this topic in a future episode, but for now, I'd just like to say how proud I am to have been a part of Multiversity, not only through this show, but also as a direct contributor over the years. From starting the weekly Multiversity 1 column with Mike back in 2013, a column still going strong when the site closed, I might add, to my Shelfbound column and covering the Palomar censorship controversy, and various reviews scattered throughout the archives, Multiversity was a place I felt comfortable doing my crazy comics thing with a great bunch of folks equally as supportive and supported in our muse chasing. 15 years is a hell of a run, and for me, a life-changing one. So, what does losing the site mean for robots? Well, one of Multiversity's many gifts to us was in not owning any of the work its contributors gave to it, including this show. Robots partnered with the site, but we were never owned by it. So in this case, the show can very much go on, and we intend to. And when I say we, I'm not just using the royal sense of that word. I can't go into too much detail right now, but you might have noticed in one of the final posts on the site that Multiversity editor, fellow podcaster, and friend of the show, Brian Salvatore, and I are putting together a collective something to help you follow your favorite Multiversity shows, maybe some new ones, a lot easier, and in possibly some new formats. We're looking at announcing said thing in the early fall, so stay tuned for that. All of this hubbub, the site closing and its fallout, has actually been the reason Robots has been on an unannounced hiatus since the end of April. Losing Multiversity made me ramp up my efforts to get a better web presence set up for this show, which I'm happy to now be able to say are complete. Or, at least version 1.0 is ready for public consumption. That's right. If you go to robotsfromtomorrow.net, you'll find our snazzy new digs, complete with a small but growing list of episodes with a more robust tagging and categorizing system, as well as an archive of some reviews and other text pieces Mike and I wrote for Multiversity Comics. Just a reminder, all of our episodes are still available through our RSS feed and your podcatcher of choice, and accessible through our Libsyn archive site at robotsfromtomorrow.libsyn.com for the time being. There's a link for that on the site. You can also follow the show over at our YouTube channel and our Blue Sky account at rftpodcast.bsky.social. But robotsfromtomorrow.net will be the best way on the internet to learn more about the show and which episodes cover what topic. And as always, this is completely free, no paywall. Just remember, it's robotsfromtomorrow.net. robotsfromtomorrow.com was overtaken by cyber pirates, but thankfully, we've escaped to this .net location and never been happier. Now, with all that business out of the way, today we are talking about Brownstone, the new YA graphic novel from writer Samuel Teer and artist Mar Julia about a 14-year-old girl spending the summer with a father she's never known as they fix up the titular dilapidated brownstone. If that name sounds familiar, it's because we just had Sam on the show last episode talking about the trials and tribulations of bringing that story from his head to the bookshelves. Now we get to hear from the other side of the Brownstone creation equation. Mar's work is absolutely in the wheelhouse of the type of comic booking we love to see here at Robots. When I was reading Brownstone, I saw Tillie Walden, I saw Carla Speed McNeil, I saw grounded situations portrayed with enough exaggeration to make this an engaging story being told, rather than a mere rendition of plot points. I'm really excited to talk to them about their process for this book and their work in general. And maybe asking Sam a thing or two if we have time. Sam, Mar, how are you doing today?
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having me back on, and I will try not to be a gremlin this time.
You weren't a gremlin last time. It's just
I got
Uh,
I got gremlin energy. I got gremlin
well,
energy.
yeah.
That was a
So
no promises implied answer.
yeah, the hopefully the question ratio won't be quite that lopsided, but it might be a good idea to start off with the same question while we still have a chance. Can you give us a little more of a pitch about Brownstone and why folks should check it out?
Yeah, it's as you had mentioned, it's the story of Almudena. She's 14. She is spending a summer with her estranged Guatemalan father, who has not really been in her life for reasons that are revealed in the book. And in this 3 month span she spends with her father, she sort of comes to learn more about him, learn to speak a little bit of Spanish while he learns to speak a bit of English, and develops like a community and a family around her that she really didn't know was a part of her life. And I think for like as far as like reasons to read it, Bar's artwork is gorgeous. That's reason enough. But I think it can appeal to anybody who has ever felt like, if you've ever felt like an outsider in
Mhm.
any capacity, in your own family, in a friend group, in a community, it's a book that speaks to that.
Yeah. It's also really good. I read it again last night and very much enjoyed it. So, reason to check it out is it's good comic booking. But having said that, I wanted to give you a chance to start off with a little bit of a reminder pitch because now we're going to shift focus to your collaborator. Mar, we've heard how this book came out from Sam's perspective. I'd love to hear about how you first heard about Brownstone and how you got involved in this project.
Yeah, Brownstone was actually something that Sam wrote after reaching out to me originally. So he reached out to me and expressed interest in working with me and was like, I'm really interested in working with you because of these reasons. And what kind of project would you be interested in working on? Which
Hmm.
is really like nice and refreshing. Sometimes it feels like they haven't read your work, and sometimes it has, but it's not quite what you're looking for right now.
Hmm.
So having someone approach you with like, let's have a talk about what we both would like to work on was really nice. So Samuel had the kind of like idea of wanting to write something about mixed heritage and that the whole kind of like outcast like those themes, and
Hmm.
wanted to work with someone who is also half Latino, which is one of the reasons he reached out to me. And it's also something I really like working on and working through those themes. So it was kind of just like stars aligned. We really both wanted to work on similar things together. And that was in like 2017 or 18. It was a while ago.
Hmm. So you're talking, he's giving you this prompt, you're giving him feedback, he's doing his clickety clackety writer type thing. He gives you a script. What was it like seeing it as a more concrete type of thing?
It was really interesting because like scripts go through lots of stages, right? So like what
Hmm.
the end book is not what he wrote at the beginning or in the middle even. It went through a lot of like stages of things and probably stages that I didn't see working with the editor before I started thumbnails and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, so it's always fun to see a script evolve. I'm used to making my own short comics and having that process all take place in my own head.
Hmm. Hmm.
So seeing it kind of evolve and change as like we're working through it, but it coming from like outside of me and then getting passed on to me to then further evolve it. It's really fun.
I think I ask a version of this question to every artist who comes on. What stage of drawing do you prefer the most? Is it thumbnailing? Is it penciling? Is it inking? You have to do all three, I guess, but which one is like, man, I can't wait to get to X?
I know what answer it's not. And it's not penciling. Not because I dislike it, but because I'm not someone who does tight pencils. I actually do them very, very loosely. And
Mhm.
sometimes I even will just blow up my thumbnails and skip penciling entirely. Um,
Mhm.
I work all digitally, so that's very easy to do for me. But I also find that it keeps my work very loose and not overwrought, which is really nice in inking. inking is really fun, but I really like the process of thumbnailing and getting to see everything unfold and design where everything goes and stuff like that. It's kind of the like it's the visual narrative storytelling of being a comic artist. And I think that's a really like fun place to be. It can be frustrating, but it's also like the most, I think, like narratively engaging. And that's what like I enjoy that aspect of it.
Hmm. How long did it take you, if you can remember, to thumbnail Brownstone?
So this answer is going to be skewed because I started thumbnailing at the end of 2019.
Okay.
So it's skewed by about 5 months because right in the middle, the pandemic started.
Ah, the whole
And
pandemic
no one
thing.
would get
Yeah.
back to me. Everyone was trying to figure out like work from home and all the different like ups and downs, but that happened between like March and like July of 2020.
Mhm.
Um, so I started around December 2019 and started penciling kind of the following like spring, summer.
Okay. Is the thumbnailing in the thumbnailing, there is still a back and forth between you and your editors and your other collaborator. It's not like you thumbnail this thing and be like, okay, here's how I see it as a complete thing, and
Mhm.
then give it to them for feedback. As you're going through chapters or whatever, you're like, how does this? How does that?
Yeah, we had a back and forth, especially because the script had was like very dense. Like Sam put a lot of really great things in the script, but it just would have been too long of a book for them to print, honestly. Like it would have been multiple books, probably like 2 books. So there was some back and forth in what do we want to keep, what do we want to condense, what feels right. And also like some writers will write a script and they'll write out panel by panel or like page by page.
Hmm.
I'm I really like doing that stuff myself. Like
Hmm.
I don't mind working with people who are like, this is page 6 and this is page 7. But I do really enjoy having like more wiggle room and freedom. It's like with Brownstone, because it was a large project and because it wasn't written like that, I went through the script first and did layouts, which are like super small, just kind of blocked out how many panels and like what parts, right? And then I
Hmm.
did thumbnails after that. So I did my layouts and then we looked at the thumbnails in batches, kind of for like what works, what's too long, what needs to be switched up a bit. Um, but by then, the script wasn't going through any major changes. Um, I do like that back and forth with editor and the whole team at large. It's the easiest stage to change something.
Yeah, things are still fluid. You're like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I have a hard no large edits after I've started inking. Like
That
small
is,
edits, fine. Huge edits, no thank you. Please tell me
yeah,
beforehand.
yeah. That sounds like a really safe and healthy rule to
Yeah.
have.
So
Good.
I'm gonna take it back to the script a little bit. When I'm scripting these days, I'm scripting for the artist,
Mhm.
but it has to go through the intermediary of editorial. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
basically have to communicate these ideas clearly to editorial, and then my undercurrent with the artist is like, I don't know, just do whatever, make it.
A little conspiracy there.
Yeah.
That's good.
So my scripts don't have like page one panel. Basically, you just remove that so that you allow the artist to add or subtract
Mhm.
based on when they get into layouts of what the rhythm they feel works better for the page.
Mhm.
So that's really important to me. And that to me is part of that whole collaborative effort. It's a hard thing to do working with larger publishers because they want everything to be on the page.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of room for the improving or just pivoting. And so that's part of writing the script and writing it loosely. I mentioned on the previous episode that the original script was 330 pages. When
Mhm.
Mar ended up doing layouts, it ended up at 380. And part of that was my own learning curve of
Mhm.
going from writing direct market comics where you can have a more dense page
Mhm.
to writing something that's a little more sparse, but still has a rhythmic theme. And so we ended up, and Mar was really involved in this process actually, of like going through and cutting. And then I remember having a pretty long phone call with our editor at the time, the acquiring editor, Erica, about what to cut because we were still over from where we needed to be.
Mhm.
Um, And that was a very interesting call. It was very interesting to sort of get Mar's perspective on some of the elements that were in a previous iteration of the story. And there were elements that Mar didn't like and didn't feel were authentic in a way. And that getting clocked at an early stage was extremely helpful for me to go, okay, what is the story? What are you trying to say here? And so that was really important at those sort of early shaping stages. Like the book's acquired, you're trying to get the script into a point where it's locked so that Mar can draw. And so we ended up doing that. And that gets us to about the end of 2019, where Mar is like jumping into thumbnails. We had like a lock script, I think around November of that year. So I just wanted to like insert that in. See, I don't need questions. Yeah. I will just find places to insert myself.
I was actually right about to pivot back to you to ask about that back and forth. This feels like we need to get back to Sam. And you're just like, by the way, I was like, oh, good. The cutting of material, was it just really like this thing needs to be dropped, this thing needs to be dropped, this thing needs to be dropped? Talk about getting those edits and being like, I don't want to lose this bit, but I realize we don't have the 5 pages it would take to really execute it well in this form. How do I keep that?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't even remember what we cut. So, like, I think a lot of it was shaping, getting out of scenes a little earlier than I originally planned on. I don't remember any major scenes that were cut. The only big edit I really remember that sticks out was there is a sequence at night where Almudena and Beto are going to K-Rawl's bodega, which all of this is Greek for anybody who hasn't read the book, but it's fine. That sequence.
Well, it's not in the book anyway, so. You know.
Well, no, this is in the book currently.
Oh, okay.
But there was a lot of conversations and debates about that general sequence, and I know that got a big rewrite. But that's the only thing that sticks out in my brain as that was a rewrite. Everything else felt like condensing or shaping. Like we can lose this; it's not necessary.
Talk a little bit about how you decided to handle Almudena's language barrier in a medium with no sound. Like I thought it was interesting your decisions to sometimes have Spanish, other times not, sometimes describing how the conversations were going, like rapid Spanish, sing-songy Spanish. I thought those were interesting ways to get across a better sense of what she's hearing, again, in a medium that has no sound, right?
That was all in the script, mostly because I am super terrible at Spanish and also a big Matt Fraction fan. So it's literally just me stealing from Fraction's Hawkeye run of, I think it might say Russian sounding stuff or something like that. And I loved that element so much that I was like, oh, this fits really well right here. So I probably owe Matt some residuals or something like that, but he's going to have to catch me at a con. And
good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that, buddy. So that's how Spanish sounds to me a lot of the time. And I wanted to incorporate that. The actual Spanish being in the book was a source of debate amongst the team. There was a lot of debate. I wanted none.
Okay.
And I will happily say that I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was incorrect. I was fast. It was an argument I lost. And I'm glad I lost it because I was incorrect. So you have this really unique balance of like, Mar and I have talked about this, but like how we sort of interpret Spanish to a certain extent. For me, my mom can speak Spanish to me and I can understand what she's saying, but I can't respond to her. I don't have any of the language, but I know enough that I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, and like can communicate with her in English. And so that's what I wanted to get across, that sort of feeling of you're living between two worlds. Something is Spanish, but you don't know quite what's being said to you. And then at other times you're like, I can hear every single word that's being said. Why is that happening? And it was a fun bit of storytelling that you don't see done very much, I don't think.
Yeah. it was a fluid. You get to see that the barriers are at least dropping a little bit. Like this is a little bit of everything, but like the paint
Yeah.
thread is great. It's like paint, no, paint, hard T, paint, that it's one fifth of the word, but like it's super important because with it, it means a liquid that you're putting on the wall. Without it, it means something completely different.
That's just every conversation I have with my mom.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, okay. So moving back to Mar, even a quick look at your portfolio shows me that you enjoy drawing environments as much as characters. Do you enjoy settings that are maybe more fantastical, or do you enjoy nailing specifics of a more realistic setting?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I feel like I enjoy both. There's like fun merits in both. I really like reading magical realism, so I like incorporating elements of that into my work where it's more realistic, but like that fantastical bent to it. I'm not like a huge high fantasy person. I really like types of fantasy that don't necessarily mean all the way that hard, but it's world building basically. It's visual
Hmm.
world building. I listen to a lot of actual play podcasts. It's probably the only type of podcast I do listen to actively. Um, but like I really
Not a fan of the
like
show.
world.
Okay.
I I
Fair
have
enough.
I
Yeah,
have
no,
friends.
it's fine. It's fine.
I have friends who make a podcast and I barely even listen to theirs. I'll
Yeah.
listen like once a year to it, and I'm the one who came up with the name for their podcast. So it's not
Like, I
personal.
sent you on your way. Have fun. Good luck with that. Okay.
I like them because I like listening to narrative things while I draw. It's like an audiobook basically. But I like doing that in my work. I really like the feeling of world building, even if it's just like an illustration and not comics work. I like
Mhm.
that feeling of there being a wider setting to it, regardless of a fantasy or realistic. So that's something that I really just like enjoy.
So with Brownstone, obviously this is a specific setting. It's a book that definitely fits the definition of the setting being a character in the story. How difficult was it, or maybe it wasn't, to lock into what it needed to look like at a certain time, at a certain point in the story to sort of maintain the continuity or illusion of it being a real place when it's just lines on paper?
Yeah, it's something that I designed with the kind of not with the characters, but like at the beginning of the book, we were figuring out what we wanted the setting to be like. Sam did leave a lot of that up to me, which was really fun. But as far as the like timeline of the brownstone being restored, that is something that was in the script. So it was really easy to kind of match the visual stages of it to what was being fixed up in the script. It's like, oh, they start in the basement, then they go upstairs. And like when I was talking to Ashanti with the color designs, it
Mhm.
was like, oh, the interior like walls are a different color at the end than they are at the beginning. They're not vastly different, but they're like a brighter green. And so continuity wise, it was like, oh yeah, from like this chapter on, the first floor has to be this color instead of this color. But because it was tied to the script that way, it kind of made it a much smoother and like not as confusing, I think, as it could have
Mm.
been type of
Mhm.
thing. Because it was probably the most linear thing in the book. It's just like it gets fixed up throughout the book. But it is really nice to kind of have it as like that anchor point behind what's going on with all the characters and all the flashbacks we get.
So then going to Sam, as you were working on the story, as you were putting it together, how much research did you have to do? Did you have to do in like how to restore a brownstone? Like what to do first,
Greg,
or did you just make it up?
Greg, you know me. You know how little I like doing research.
I was giving you an opportunity
No.
to lie.
No. So there's a couple elements. So
Uh-huh.
my dad is very good with his hands and fixing things. My brother is as well. I am a turd at that. So not good. But I have seen them do it and sort of when I had originally reached out to Mar and the idea of Brownstone began forming, I was working at a hardware store part-time because I needed a part-time job. So I was around a lot of like hardware and people asking me questions that I had no fucking clue and have to go ask somebody else. And so little bits of information kind of made its way into the book that I just happened to absorb through osmosis. I had a teacher who once was convinced that that's how I learned because I did not pay attention at all, but could test well. So yeah, it's really just those elements. And then, knowing like, we had moved into a house by the time I started actively scripting Brownstone. So we were doing our own sort of repair work or having people come in and do repair work. And so you're sort of seeing that process. So it was a lot of just all of a kind of big soup of things that then I kind of ladled into a bowl for people's consumption, I guess. I was trying to figure out where that metaphor was going.
Close enough. The book overall, it did feel very autobiographical in a way that doesn't seem super obvious, but there was an authenticity to it, which is one of the things I liked about it. I have my own ideas about the answer to this question, but I want to throw it out there. What made you decide to set this story in 1995? What does it gain from being set in that year versus being present day or even like maybe 1975 or 85? Like, what does 1995 do for the story?
All right, this is the big secret I've been keeping. I am old, guys, very old. So 1995, I would have been 14, 15 myself. And around that year, we went to Guatemala for the first time. I went and met my great grandfather. We lived at his house for a few weeks and everything. And that is really the seed of Brownstone, like going all the way back then. I remember not wanting to go, and I don't understand this, and none of this makes sense, and getting there and seeing just this world that was so different than my Midwestern world and feeling this weird pang in my chest of like, why does this resonate? Why does this feel like home to a certain extent? And being completely like, it was an alien world. Everybody else spoke a language that I didn't. I did my best to keep up and I was trying new foods and everything. But at the end of the book, there's a moment where Almundena's leaving and she sort of stuffs like a jaguar, an imaginary jaguar, in a trunk. And that was very much how I felt coming home. Was like I came home and I brought something back with me. It was a new piece of who I was or who I was going to be. So that was really like that seed for the story. And like it gets into that autobiographical element. There are elements to the story. They're not quite one-to-one because writing something one-to-one, I lived it. I don't really want to reiterate it. That's not interesting to me. I love reading autobiocomics, but it's not something I'm great at. So that was doing a little bit of masking to a certain extent and going, okay, well, let's set this in, America. I obviously don't have an estranged relationship with my dad at all. So that's not a thing. But in bringing those elements of my life, they started like interestingly reflecting some elements of Mar's own life that then found their way into the story as well.
Yeah, the two of you had to have some sort of real creative melding to be able to come up with a story and execute it like this, where it really feels like you're really putting yourself into a different headspace in this particular voice, in this particular setting. That does not surprise me at all because the book really does feel very authentic within the parameters that it sets up.
Well, thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
To both of you.
It's one of those things where like Mar and I didn't have as many conversations as I think people would believe going into it. It was a very odd mind melding almost. The things that I was going to put in the book, Mar was like, yeah, I know that. I know that. I know what that's like. Yeah. And it was like, oh, okay, cool. This is resonate. Like Mar's my first reader to a certain extent. We're on the right track. And I'm obviously technically not a 14-year-old girl, but in my heart, I still am. But I spent a lot of time around women in my life. I'm very close to my mom. I have a wife who I spend all of my time with. So incorporating some elements of what it was like to be a young lady. Like, it's not that far removed from being like a kind of chubby punk rock kid in the Midwest. They're not that different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And had that trip you had taken around that age that really helped seed a lot of the things that then blossom into a lovely fictional forest. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm going to go with that anyway.
I like it.
One of the things I thought you were going to say was Almadena's identity as being American and sort of learning about her history. And like, I thought we were Mexican. We're Guatemalan? What does that mean? I feel like now, in terms of identity, it may be something that was a little more in the consciousness, whereas almost 30 years ago, she would have been a little more removed from that if she wasn't prompted to do the research herself. Her lack of knowledge of her place in things is aided by the fact that was not as much in the consciousness of the culture, certainly in America at that time.
So there's a lot of what I do is happenstance. I think originally it was 96 or maybe 97. And we just changed it back 2 years because I was getting pushback from my agent at the time about cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, well, why don't they have cell phones? And I was like, okay, I really don't want to sit here and do the emotional labor of explaining to your white privilege how. In 97, yeah, some of us had cell phones, but a lot of people still didn't. And it was kind of a economical issue. And then I think I wanted to make an accurate Street Fighter reference also. And so I was like, oh yeah, so 95 would have been, so it would still be in arcades. It's very important to me to get the video game thing right. But there is a line in the book where we almost put a hat on it, where one character says to another, this is not cultural appropriation, it's just snacks. And I had to actually research when that term came into being, and I was like, ha, safe. I don't have to change that.
Yeah. Anachronism? No. Good. Okay. The line stays. Yeah. Off-brand, I thought was a nice, it wasn't used nice, but I was like, that was a clever term. Was it a conscious decision to not have a real antagonist for the story other than just like society's perceptions of things, or that Almudena is up against this time pressure of having to get through a couple of months with her father or only having a couple of months? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I detest narrative simplicity in a way that gets me in a lot of trouble. But
I think the book's better without having that thing, by the way.
Well, I think that the character of Idola sort of fulfills that antagonistic role. She's not really the antagonist, but is very clearly a reflection of Almudena. This is somebody who knows who she is. You are Almudena, somebody who doesn't. Idola very much knows who she is and has a lot of pride in who she is. And Almudena is still figuring out who she is. And so, in a way, they're sort of reflections of each other. And usually when you have two people that are reflections of each other, one being a teenager and one being an adult, there is just friction. And so it didn't seem necessary. And I'll be honest, nobody ever brought it up if there should be an antagonist.
Okay. Again, I think it works great. Almudena gets friction from a couple of different places. It's a little bit of friction here, more friction from her trying to fit in and understand people, and people being to like, why learn Spanish? And she's like, learn English, you're in America. But the invisible antagonist is the gentrification, all of these cultural forces squeezing the community. There is a tension there without it having to be literally personified in jerky, McJerkface, evil landlord or developer trying to lie up the things. Okay, this book took a long time. How do you stay focused? How do you avoid burnout?
I'll start. I worked on this book for actively 3 to 4 years, probably.
That's like a college education.
It is. Graphic novels in general take a lot longer than people think they do. Definitely a lot longer than what's allocated, for instance, direct market, like floppies and stuff like that. What IDW puts out doesn't take as long as what First Second puts out or whatever. It's not a value judgment. It's just those processes are very different. And the fact of the matter is, I know a lot of people who burn out making any type of comics on any schedule. Some of it's self-imposed, but a lot of it is not self-imposed, rather, sorry, from like the industry, because graphic novels are so long. They're a lot of work, especially when they're full color. You're going over 320 pages, however many times. And a lot of it is, I guess, just pacing yourself. I deal with chronic illness, so I can't do, for instance, two graphic novels that are on the same schedule. Like I couldn't pencil two books at a time. Like I would expire, like fall over and die. But if I'm coloring something and thumbnailing something else, that's more doable. For instance, towards the end of Brownstone, I got contacted for another book, and I said, sure. Giant caveat, I can't start until I'm done with Brownstone. Like I just will not start until I'm done with Brownstone. And they were like, okay. So that's how I don't burn out. It's a lot of work balance. It's a lot of knowing my own physical boundaries. A lot of it was the editor that was with us for the second half of the book, Wesley, was very, very kind and very much like push stuff back without me asking, was very much like, that deadline sounds not doable for you. Like, why don't you move it out a week? Like, she was very much encouraging me to be kinder to myself and not worry as much about the industry and what our publisher wanted from me. Because this book was supposed to originally come out last year. And I ended up wrapping last year around September. And it gets done when it gets done. Graphic novels are very long. And it really is just taking stock of where you are and knowing not to push yourself. Some people can do two books. I can't. Some people can do books very quickly. I can't. Some people take 5 years to do a graphic novel. So it's really individualistic, I think, as far as from an artist or an artist creator type viewpoint.
As an artist, as a freelancer, somebody who I'm sure wants to say yes to everything, how hard has it been keeping yourself to saying no when you need to?
I think that's a skill I learned when I was quite young, before really I even was developed my chronic illness I deal with now. In my early 20s, when I started freelancing, I would get inquiries for things and I'd be like, I need money, but I'm not really interested in this. Or it's too much work if I do all of this, right? So I think it's something that individual people have their own relationships with and deal with differently, struggle with differently. There is the like, I need to pay rent. Maybe I should take on more like freelancer brain response. But for me, I learned it very early that a key part in not burning myself out is not just physical work, but also not pouring myself into things I'm not interested in. I'm very selfish like that in terms of the work I want to make. If I'm going to devote 4 years of myself to it, I want to enjoy it. I want to be in it. I want to have a good partnership with someone if I'm working with someone else on that book. Sam and I have a lot of the same interests in terms of like narrative structure. I also prefer more non-Western styles of narrative structure or less straightforward, simplistic, here's an antagonist kind of structures. A book like that probably would have been a lot less interesting to me than what we ended up with, which was something that feels more realistic and more lived and special than something like super straightforward. So that also is a key part in not burning out for me, is that I don't want to ever get to the place where I'm just like, I'm not just burnt out, I actively hate what I'm making. And if I don't make work that I hate, I don't get asked for more work that I hate. It's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Where when I was younger and saying no to things, and I'm still broke, but like a lot more broke, my mom would be like, why are you doing that? Stop. Say yes, make money. I'd be like, no, I don't want to make more of this work down the line. And I made some work that isn't necessarily what I always make, but I didn't hate it.
Like it was within your acceptable parameters of
there's parameters.
Who are some of the cartoonists or professionals you look to as models of what they do artistically or how they handle themselves in these situations? Who did you look up to?
Sorry, I'm just like mentally condensing this list because this answer could be very long if you wanted it to be.
Whoever you want to shout out.
I mean, one person that I think jumps out as like someone who was making work then and making work now and who I still really admire is going to be a no-brainer is Jillian Tamaki. Her work is amazing. And Mariko's also a great writer, but they are a really good pair. like they work really well off one another. And Jillian's artwork really, I like the way she kind of paces stories. Earlier, Sam mentioned Brownstone is a little quieter and a little less dense, and I really like pacing stories that feel like they have space to breathe and like think, basically. I'm not like a huge big two person. I used to be, I tried it, but a lot of what happens with direct market books is they're so short, they need to be super dense, and they don't have that space you get in like a novel or a graphic novel or even like a short one that's like 60 pages. So it's nice to have that space to kind of have differences in pacing. And I think Jillian is an artist that does that really well. I look at a lot of my friends' work for inspiration. I really value having creative friends around that I can like chat with and show things. Kathy G. Johnson, Rosemary Blair O'Connell are two that have graphic novels out that would be names that you can pick out. But just all of my friends, even those who make shorter work, self-published work, I really look to what my friends are making to kind of see what I like and then look inward about what kind of work I want to be making.
So for the book, the credits read illustrations by Marjulia, which drives me a little crazy. Because they're not illustrations, just like comics. But you know, what are you going to do? They also say color design by Ashanti Fortson and typography by Mary Claire Cruz. Can you talk about their contributions to the book beyond that line item mention?
Yeah, so Mary Claire was our book designer for Brownstone. I believe she now works at Penguin Random House, but she was at Versify the designer when we started Brownstone, and then stayed on freelance when she moved jobs. I'm very grateful for her. She did an amazing job. She was really wonderful to work with. And basically, we didn't have a letterer per se for this book. I put everything where I wanted it and set it, and then she kind of finalized the interior. And in terms of design on the outside, she designed the title, she picked the fonts. The interior of the book, we had like a 2-hour like call going over like fonts that she picked out, where it was like, what do you want the font to feel like? I want it to feel like my handwriting, kind of, because when I make short comics, I hand letter. And she was like, okay. And then she presented me with like a list. We went through like pros and cons for like each font, and like she set them in pages to like see how they would look. So she was wonderful. She's absolutely wonderful. In terms of color design, having a colorist was a practical desire, want, need for me. But a full colorist wasn't necessarily in our budget. So I basically identified what was most important to me about a colorist, and that is their design sensibilities for the color in the book and how that affects feelings you get from certain scenes. Like there's the night scene where they're outside and they go to Carl's Bodegas. That's one of the things I think of where I'm like, absolutely fantastic, knocked it out of the park. I couldn't have done this by myself. And Ashanti is someone who was the first person I asked who I wanted to do this. Their color work is beautiful, like amazing. They do a lot of painterly work of their own work, and they're also a graphic novelist. They really knocked it out of the park. They are really good at emotional shifts in color tones. That's really wonderful. So when Ashanti said yes, that they would, color design the book, they would take my pages thumbnail size and do like color keys on everything. And then I would translate that into a larger page and do the flatting and put the color in the rest of the book. And basically, I kind of went through the book beforehand and gave them notes where I was like, for this scene, I imagined kind of this, or this scene, I imagined this, but like, feel free to branch out if you need to. Like with Carl's flashback, I was like, I feel like it would be fun if this was in sepia. And Ashanti was like, that seems great. So we worked closely together on it, and not just because they're my friend and they live in Baltimore, but because they're very good at what they do.
Great.
And I had no part in any of that process.
Right.
Like really, I really did. I got shown things and I was like, well.
Ashanti's work is amazing. One of my favorite scenes that isn't the one I just mentioned in terms of the color design, it's 2 pages. It's not very long at all. It's when Almudena's in the arcade because she got lost. Those pinks and purples that when they handed me the like color keys for that chapter, I was like, this is so good. I was just so happy with it. And I couldn't have finished this book this way without Ashanti. And so I'm really grateful for them.
Yeah, I'm looking at those pages right now.
Yeah,
I want
so
to
good.
point out one of my favorite little moments. It's on page
Uh-huh.
270, and it's really of just Violet slamming the phone up against the wall. But the color that's done around her eyes and oh my God. Anytime I think about color in this book, that's the image that comes to my brain. And you feel the
Oh, yeah,
emotion
yeah,
in
okay,
it.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I really adore that. And like
yeah.
Ashanti did, I hate saying like, "Oh, you did such a great job," or the things like that, because I feel like it's never really enough to communicate what it means. But Ashanti really went harder on this book than they had any reason to.
Mm,
Like, and I am forever grateful to them for that because they could have phoned it in. And when you find people who could phone things in and don't,
mhm.
that's to me, somebody loves comics. And
Yeah.
you get that just from the sense of color design that's being done. So.
Yeah. Oh, man, so good. All right, I need to minimize this PDF. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to answer. I won't be able to ask any questions. Looking at that page 270, that's in the middle of when we're getting information about Javier. Talk about walking the tightrope of having Javier remain a likable character because he's very likable throughout the whole book when we don't find out until well into the book why he was not a part of her life because he seems to be not the type of guy who would not be there. Talk about how you maintained that tension up until the right point to be able to explain to Almudena and the reader why Javier has not been there.
Wow. That whole thing was, I knew we needed an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just one of those things where you can't just not explain it. Like, the reader will feel so cheated. And so I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I know that has to come, and I know that we need to spend time. And this is where things get a little too personal for me. Uh, so, at the time of writing,
Mm-hmm.
we were becoming foster parents. So the chapter that is sort of we're getting a visualization of a letter that Javier has written to
Mm-hmm.
Almudena about where he's been, and he's explaining himself to her. And I don't have an estranged father, but I have a complicated relationship with my dad. I love him very much, but when I was a teenager, it was rough. It was hard. So becoming a foster parent and bringing a kid into your house. And we were not bringing a child, we were bringing in a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
um, During the course of writing the book, I was going from being Almudena, like on a day-to-day basis, like living in her headspace, and then having to shift to the position of being a parent and saying, oh God, I don't want to fuck you up the way that I got fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that to me was like, I know I needed that emotional beat in the story, but that was the moment that felt the most authentic for Javier to have a real moment of communication as clear as possible, telling his daughter everything that he felt and that he was sorry and sad and broken. And this is now you can hear me. I'm getting
Mm-hmm.
misty and everything. So, but it really does. I have said this. I've said it to you, Greg. I've said it to Mara. Anybody who listens to me for more than 10 seconds talk about this book is that's the moment where I cut my wrist and I bleed on the page for everybody. All of like the stuff with Almudena prior to that, like, is hard. You're navigating who you are and who you're going to be. But this is a moment of looking back at who you were and looking back at your own mistakes and hoping that you can be forgiven. And I think that's an important part of the story. I think it's an important thing to put out in the world because I think
Mm-hmm.
maybe we could use a little bit more of that in today's world.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I have for that. It was very hard. It's every time we had to go back and like do edits or reread the book or do consistency checks or go over colors, would have to go through those pages. And
Mm-hmm.
every single time I just bawled my eyes out at that chapter. it was hard enough to write it and edit the script, but then seeing Mar's artwork of delivering those emotional beats in such a intense but cathartic way
Mhm.
just eviscerated me every single time. In a great way. Like it's
Yeah.
again very cathartic and very lovely, but it is still hard for me to talk about. So
I appreciate you going there for that. It is a really lovely part of the book. It does everything it needs to do, and it's yeah, okay. I need to close this PDF. Seriously, like I don't.
see, I have the
Eh,
book in my lap.
oh
My books are
well.
downstairs. I haven't brought them upstairs yet.
Yeah. Well, it's not June 11th, so I have not had an opportunity to purchase the book yet. Okay. Mar, do you think you have a graphic novel in you without a writer?
Yes. I think of myself as someone who's quite picky about writers that I work with. And I know that some writers would probably find me a pain in the ass. Because unless it's something short, unless it's something that, not that I can phone in, but like is not necessarily something as much effort as like a graphic novel, years and years of my life. I don't really
Commitment.
like just being, yeah, commitment. I don't really like being handed a script that I don't find a way to kind of also work through my like craft in. So like Brownstone being a collaboration is kind of like the perfect kind of setup for me because I want that connection to something I'm going to have to work on for 4 years. And until Brownstone, the only work that I had done where I was working with a writer was like I did some Adventure Time floppies, or like I did a Lumberjade special. And those are all very short things to do. And they paid my rent for a while. I did those for a few years, but it's not a project and an artistic endeavor in the same way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely would like to make work on my own, but I'm also very choosy about writers that I do get to work with, which I know I was a pain in the ass in the beginning, but and
Yeah. But the ends justify the
it's just
means. I
because
mean,
I want to feel that connection to the work I'm making, and I felt it. I think Sam and I are kind of aligned very easily on certain things in the book.
mhm.
And there were conversations, like we said, that things we weren't aligned on. But I think we approach our work similarly in a way that worked really well to collaborate together. Like there was enough differences that we kind of had back and forth to make stuff interesting, and enough similarities that it was like, yeah, I see what you want. I see what you mean when you write this and what you want it to look like. You know what I mean?
Ironically enough,
Yeah.
on a book where language is just like a huge barrier, you two were thrown together. I'm like, oh, no, I get it. You don't have to explain that. I got it. Sorry,
So
Sam.
we've kind of talked around this. So I do actually want to talk about it. There is a scene where a character comes out. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a point of contentious conversation between myself, Mar, and the editor at the time, Erica. And a lot of it was me listening. I had a perspective on what I wanted to do. And it was very much echoing movies of the time. And Mar made a really great argument. And not even an argument, because it wasn't an argument. It was a point, and made a point that there was an element that basically we were going to have Almudena try to kiss Beto, and it was going to be a thing. And Mar talked about coming from a place of being queer and things like that, and how that made them feel.
Mhm.
And like, it was another instance where I was wrong.
Mhm.
The purpose of having collaborators is not to get someone to do your bidding. And this is my general rule that I've talked about, and people are tired of hearing me say, but it's for me, best idea wins.
Mhm.
Not my best idea, but best idea, because we are making a book, and what matters is the final product, not my fucking ego. And so that was one of these points where I remember coming out of that conversation and it was frustrated and it was angry and it was like, nobody's listening to me. And at the end of the day, I was wrong. And that was the thing I had to come to. And I rewrote what was that scene. and went along with what everybody else's notes were. And it was the right thing to do in that moment, because if we left it in the book, it wouldn't feel right. It would come off as inauthentic. And so that was a really important conversation in the making of the book. If I am going to walk around and say, oh, it's best idea wins, I had to really live by them. And I am forever grateful that we had those conversations that were honest, that are about making the book better.
I also just had a meeting with our editor, Wesley, about what I would want to do next after this, right?
Mhm.
And she was just talking about like editorially, like what kind of notes are you interested in? And this is something Erica, our acquiring editor for Brownstone, also asked us. And I am not interested in anything that isn't an interesting evolution or like addition to the story, basically. And when it came to that scene and actually adding Spanish into the book, which is something I really wanted to tie that back in, I wanted to make sure that those scenes weren't just about Almudena, but also about the other character in them, and making sure that it felt equally as cathartic for Beto as it did for Almudena in that scene. And just in terms of like Spanish, making sure that Javier felt like a real character throughout the book. He had things that he was saying and talking to with other people, even if Almudena doesn't understand it till the end.
Mm.
And so those things were coming from a place of like, I don't want to like cut this or like change your vision or whatever, but I want this to feel cathartic and not just like it's here for no reason. And with the coming out scene, the editor Erica also had some good notes for like that scene, and in ways we could steer it and keep this as a scene where Almudena doesn't really know how to react to this, but also have it feel cathartic for Beto in some way.
So this book took a long time. That seems to be both a blessing and a curse. It can be a marathon or a grind to get these things out. The blessing seems to be, and I may have mentioned this, Sam, when we talked earlier, I might just be coming back to this idea, that time also allows you to sit in the story, have conversations about the story, and work through permutations. You get to have the type of meditations on what you're doing in a way that you don't for shorter term or faster paced work. And I feel like I've heard multiple instances in this conversation where Brownstone became a better book because you had time to get the feedback, to go back and forth, for you to process that feedback, Sam, for you to come to the realization the best idea, not the best idea of mine, right? That internal journey, whether that takes a millisecond or an hour, a day, a week, or whatever. So yeah, we've had to wait multiple years for this book, but it's a better book for coming out June 11th, 2024 than coming out June 11th, 2022. That's what I'm getting from this conversation. Something Sam mentioned, I think before you came on the call, Mar, is that he learns more about your process every time he comes on to one of these interviews. Sam, do you have any particular question you would like to ask Mar? Or maybe first, Mar, do you have any particular question you've wanted to ask Sam that you haven't had a chance yet?
I don't know. I feel like I also learned things about the script when we talk about this. The last time we did like an interview together, it was, I don't think I knew that your wife danced. I don't think I knew that's where Violet being a dancer came from. So that was very cute and sweet. And I like learning things like that. Because we also mentioned this earlier, I also work through things, themes in my life, whatever, by fictionalizing them. And I think that adds to the story, that makes it better. And so I like learning little things that got slipped in because they were a part of Sam's life.
Mm-hmm. Little grace notes, little textures. All right. Sam?
I don't think I have a question per se. I feel like we're winding down. So this feels like a really good opportunity. Greg, I didn't tell you I was going to do this. Mar doesn't know I'm going to do this. So, Mar, I want to say to you, thank you so much. We've been working together for so long, and really, for the listeners, I'm holding a copy of the book up right now. The book is done. It is out in stores. You can go buy it. And the idea that, oh, come Wednesday, I'm not working with Mar in the same capacity anymore. We built this thing and we're attached to each other for the rest of our lives, but it's not the same. And so it is very bittersweet to me. And I'm really sad that we're not going to be working together. But I want to tell you like how much everything you've done and everything you've brought to the table has meant to me. Because we don't get to do this. Mara and I don't get to, it's a lot of emails. So we don't get to talk face to face. So it meant so much to me. And this book is so personal for me. I know it's personal for you. But I'm just going to be forever grateful for you being willing to be a collaborative partner on this. And I just really want to say thank you.
Really sweet. Thank you. I wish I had a response. I was not prepared.
It's fine.
That's so wonderful. Yeah, I think that is a good place to bring this in for a landing. The book is fantastic. People whose opinion I very much respect are looking for this. Paul Gravett is a gentleman, a comic scholar that I had the chance to talk to recently. He is a man who literally has forgotten more about comics than I think any of us will know. On his check out June 2024, Brownstone by Samuel Teer and Mark Julia. I was like, ooh, I'm going to talk to them. Yay! Like, that's great. So it is just wonderful to see this book finally out. Wonderful to get a chance to read it, to see how good it is, and to know that it's going to be getting into people's hands and being enjoyed. Sam, Mar, thank you so much for coming on the show, getting a chance to talk with me and each other about this. And I'm really hoping you both get a chance to work together again soon, because the two of you do good comic booking. This is good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you for listening. Disengage.